All right, welcome back to episode 25 of the Rally Report podcast. We got another returner to the pod. Hopefully he doesn't mind because I do plan to have him on a lot more as we continue cranking these out. But honestly, got so many good responses last time I had him on, so we're taking full advantage of him. Welcome back, Stuart Crawford. How's it going?
Thanks for having me, Sean. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. I mean, last time we had you on, the predictions were absolutely spot on, 2 for 2 for the winners for the CSA individuals. So in terms of prediction credibility, Sue's at 100% right now. But
it may be a tough act to follow then, but I'll try my best. So
yeah. So this one, I think it might be a little more tricky considering we're no longer dealing with CSA, but it's the biggest tournament of the calendar year for the PSA World Champs. It's going to be held in Cairo, Egypt, and the prize money is at $1.1 million this year. But as per usual, PSA provides zero transparency with what that payout looks like. But I'm going to take a stab at it and say it's around, whoever wins it takes around 80 to 100K, which is...
I can tell you exactly how much it is, and that's a very good guess.
You want... How much... Wait, you do know the payout?
Yeah. I can access it on the PSA website.
Could you give us some insight on how much the winner takes away from this?
Yeah, you're very, very close. You were a little bit high, but the winner gets just under 80,000.
Oh, that is pretty cool. Okay, got it. Well, I was assuming because they had increased it, so I was like, maybe they're pushing it up for the winner, but I guess it's still around that 80K mark. It's a joke considering it's the biggest tournament of the year, how much the winner takes.
It is, but it's good to see the prize money consistently going. I mean, there was a lot of sort of PR and publicity when the Windy City announced that it was going to be $1 million tournament, and for Cairo to step up and exceed that is very promising. Yeah. They've obviously supported the game a lot during COVID and a lot of the black ball events, and some of the other Egyptian tournaments have kind of kept the tour going for a while. Now we're getting back to normal, but there was certainly a good 6 to 12 months where if it hadn't been for CIB Bank in Egypt and a few promoters over there, then there wouldn't have been much of a tour to speak of.
Yeah. Well, so before we get into it, I had two questions for you, Stu. Two general questions first is how big do you think it's an advantage that this tournament is being played in Egypt for the Egyptian players?
I think it helps them a little bit. I think they feed off the crowd support, and it's always better when you don't have to travel, you don't have to deal with time zone changes, but I wouldn't say they have a significant advantage because they've pretty much shown that they can perform well anywhere. It's not like they come to the US and they struggle, or they go to the British Open in the UK and have a hard time. They're still winning those events as well. Where I think it does favour them is, like I say, the crowd support and the familiarity. I actually just went to, since we last recorded a couple of months ago, I've been to Egypt for the first time. I went over for the Egyptian Junior Nationals, and it's just a different way of life. So I think if you're familiar with that, that's an advantage. But I think most of the top players have been to Egypt so many times in the last few years that that's not really a factor these days.
And the second question is, what do you for the effects of TOC, do you think it was a better decision for players who have a shot in going deep in this tournament to not have played?
That's a good question. I found it quite interesting that you've obviously got, on the men's side, the two big favourites are Paul and Ali, and Ali's playing TOC and Paul's not. And then on the women's side, you could say that the two big favourites are Gohar and Shabini. You could probably throw Hanya into the mix there on the women's side. But again, you've got Gohar playing TOC and Shabini not. So, I think that's the sort of thing that comes down to personal preference. Some players like to get into that rhythm of playing and getting into a tournament mode, and other players probably prefer the extra block of training and just preparing mentally and being ready to go for next week. Yeah.
And before we dive into it today, we're recording this during TOC finals today. Do you have a quick prediction on who's going to take it?
I think it's hard. I've watched a little bit this week, not as much as I normally would. I was over in Bermuda for the small Challenger PSA event for 3 days this week, so I watched a bit of that. But Ali's looked like he's very comfortable. He's kind of gone through the draw.
with ease, yeah.
Yeah, some tough matches on paper. With I think he played Wilstrop, then Miguel and Mazin, and he's looked pretty comfortably yet to drop a game. So it's hard to see him losing to Diego. Diego obviously had a harder match yesterday in the semis against Sorav, going to 5. And then similarly, Gohar has looked pretty comfortable. She dropped a game to Victor, but then Amanda had a 5-setter as well, so it's not like she's completely fresh. But
yeah,
I think it'd be a surprise if either of those two lost it out.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be standard. The seeds are going to take it. So let's start with the women's draw first. So why don't we start off with Stu? Who do you think has a shot? Who do you think are the contenders for this tournament? Who has a real shot at winning this?
I think in general in the women's game, you're starting to see a big 3 of Gohar, Sherbini and Hanya. Now, Sherbini, there's a few question marks about if she's fully recovered. She didn't play the British Open due to injury. But usually when she's fit and healthy, even though if she's not number 1 in the world or the number 1 seed, I still consider her the player to beat. It's crazy to me that she's going for her 6th World Championship. I think she's still only 25 years old, maybe 26, but
I think so.
But yeah, she's just a phenomenal player. She'll probably go down in history as one of the best female players of all time, given what she's already achieved. And like I say, she's got plenty of time on her side to achieve a lot more. I do think Hanya's starting to emerge as a real contender now, winning the British Open and beating Gohar. That was she'd actually done well against Sherbini in the past, but she'd struggled against Gohar. So being able to win that match in the British Open final shows that she's right in the mix now with those two.
What do you think differentiates the top? I agree with you. It's the big 3 between them and the rest of the pack for the women's game right now.
I think in one sense, the consistency. I mean, everyone says that the rankings tend to reflect consistency. And, it's pretty clear that they are ranked 1, 2, and 3 in the world because of that. I mean, Gohar's run, I think she made 9 consecutive finals, it said. And she's now made another one at the TOC. So I think the last person to do that, it said, was Nicole David. So even Sherbini, Renee Melwili, even they haven't managed to demonstrate that level of consistency. So for her, she's playing well, but there's a couple of little question marks just because of the nature of that British Open final. She'd been so dominant against Hanya for most of their matches. I think she had 1 loss to her, but it was when she sort of retired with an injury, so it wasn't a proper defeat. Yeah,
I think the British Open was the first legitimate defeat.
Yeah. And she just looked, in that match, she just looked a little bit lost. It was almost like she's added a bit more variety to her game. She's moving a lot better. But then when Hanya got on top, she just didn't quite know how to respond. And she kind of went back to her old game of just hitting the ball hard and hoping for the best. And kind of lost the plan that seemed to have been working for her so well. I've always felt that Hanya had struggled to cope with getting Gohar out of her rhythm, but she seemed to do a much better job of that. She seemed to mix the pace, and she was able to get in front and volley a bit more without Gohar's pace sort of forcing her back all the time, and that allowed her to use more variety and to attack the front corners a bit better.
Do you think El Sharpini does a way better job in terms of breaking down Gohar's game?
Yes, but she's also struggled recently just with almost with the physicality of Gohar's game. Now, whether that's because Gohar's upped her physicality a little bit, or Sherbini's maybe not quite at her best physically. I don't quite know the reason, but the last few times they've played, Sherbini's actually struggled. I can't quite remember what tournament it was, but I remember they had a really, really high quality first game at one of the tournaments. I could probably look it up, but then after that, Gohar just kind of ran away with the match. So. Yeah, right. When she's playing her best, I think Sherbini can sort of live with anyone because she controls the rallies so well that she doesn't do as much work as the other girls. So she ends up controlling the play and making them get tired before she does.
Yeah. And now, from the three, who do you think will take the title?
I always struggle to look past Shabini. Anytime she's in the draw, I think she's the favourite.
No matter what seat.
Especially in the last few years, probably since Raneem retired. I think their matches could be 50-50, but since she retired a couple of years ago, I always consider Shabini the player to beat. The fact that she's back in the draw suggests that maybe she's not fully fit, but she didn't play the British Open, I presume, to give herself more time to recover and get herself ready for the Worlds. So I think she's always going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, and as you said, she's won this 5 times. It seems like she steps it up every time she plays this tournament. So.
Yeah. It is crazy that she's managed that. I mean, she's 25 years old. 26 years old.
26, yeah. Stepped it up as.
And she already has 5 world championships. Pretty phenomenal.
I wanted to ask you now about a couple informed players and what you think about their games. A couple I had in mind was to start off was Tina Gillis. I think she's been playing phenomenally well as of late, and she's paired up to be in the draw with El Sherbini, I think in the 3rd round. And they've gone to 5 a couple times.
Yeah.
What do you think of Tina's game?
She's actually unfairly seeded because I think she's still seeded based on her previous ranking, and she just moved up something crazy like 11 12 spots in the rankings, which is, if you know how the rankings work, that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah. She just jumped up to 13.
Yeah,
in the world.
But I think she's seeded 23, which is why she has such a tough draw.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's a good mover, good athlete. Some similarities with her sister, but probably does a little bit more with the ball. She's maybe not quite as good a mover as her sister, although she is still a good mover. But then she's showing that she can really take the game to the top players as well. So yeah, I think that is you're right. That's an interesting draw that they're playing so early. And we'll see how that goes.
And the next name was obviously Gina Kennedy. She's paired up to meet with Hania again in the 3rd round.
Yep.
Very athletic player. What do you think of her game?
I think she's going to move up the rankings. I think she'll be, if I'm looking at who's the next player that can get in and challenge that top 3, I think she might be the next person to get to that level. I don't think she's there yet. I think she still needs to add a few things to her game. I think she needs to be a bit more clinical when she's taking the ball in short. Her movement and physical side of the game is very good, but I don't think her racket work is. She reminds me of a sort of a raw version of Hania. Hania's obviously a great athlete and a good mover, but she's really added a bit more to her game, and I would say she's got a better short game. She's got a bit more variety than Gina, but I think in the next sort of year to maybe a year and a half, 2 years, I think she's maybe the next person that's going to start challenging those top 3 consistently.
Mm-hmm. And then there are a couple U.S. players in the mix as well that I wanted to mention was Olivia Vicker and Sabrina Sobey. They're also paired up to me, I think, 2nd round.
Which is a really interesting matchup because, well, first of all, I think Victor's playing incredibly well. She's just had a good run to the semis in the TOC, and she got a game off Gohar last night. So
not a lot of people do take a game off Gohar.
Exactly. And I think she's playing with a bit more belief. She's 10 or 11 in the world, and I think she believes that she not only belongs there, but she can push on and move up even higher. Like, I don't know if she necessarily viewed herself in the same category as those girls, but ever since, I think it was the US Open, she made the semi-finals when she beat Amanda along the way. And then ever since then, she's played with a lot more confidence. Her game was clearly improving, but sometimes, even if you're playing well, you just need that 1 or 2 big wins to to give yourself a belief that you belong in that company with those best players in the world.
Right.
But at the same time, like you say, she's got a tough draw because she's playing Sabrina, who she played fairly recently.
And she lost.
DC. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they're similar ages, and I think Sabrina historically has had the better of Olivia. So it's probably a good draw for Sabrina because it's a girl that she knows that she can compete well with, and she has a good chance if she plays well. So she's probably relishing that draw. She's actually had some pretty tough draws recently, Sabrina. She keeps coming up against some top seeds, and I was speaking to her sort of 2 or 3 weeks back, and she was just saying that she was looking forward to the next round of tournaments because she felt like if she played well, I think she just lost last week in TOC to
Rowan El-Rabi in 5.
Yeah, in 5.
That was nuts.
I think she had match ball. And then she talked about that match, and obviously Victor as well. So she'll be looking at that as an opportunity, but at the same time, I think Victor believes that she's not just 10 or 11 in the world. She's better than that, and if she wants to start proving it, she needs to start consistently making semis and quarters, certainly quarterfinals of these level of tournaments. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think that might be the match. The best match for round 2 for those two.
Yeah, I would say so too. I actually have a few other matches highlighted. So Gohar actually has a pretty tough second round against Farida Mohammed.
Both hard hitters.
Exactly. So watch out for that one. But Farida's the girl that sort of gets stuck in and doesn't seem overwhelmed by playing the top players, kind of just goes on and plays her game, which, as you said, is just hit the ball as hard as you can most of the time. But she certainly doesn't seem overawed playing those top girls. There's another good match. Noor Al-Tayyab, if she gets through her first round, will play Salma Hani in the second round as well, which is another.
Yeah, I wrote that down as well. What do you think of Tayyab? Do you think it's about time that she comes back? Because she's been back now for a solid year, I want to say. Do you think this might be the tournament for a breakthrough again?
Yeah, I think she's doing fairly well already. So, I don't
she
think
beat Hania, right? I believe.
Yeah, she did. At Black Ball, maybe.
Right.
But yeah, she's a player that is clearly going to get back in the top 10 soon. It's just a matter of when.
Do you think Tayyab at her best should challenge the top, should be in the mix with the top 3, or do you think she's a tier below?
I think she probably is, but even at her best, she wasn't beating Shabini consistently. She wasn't beating Raneem consistently. I think at her best, she was ranked 3 behind those two. And I think the first step for her is to get back to that level before she can even think about trying to compete and challenge against those girls. But I don't think she's that far off that level. Again, it's tough when your ranking's a little bit lower and you don't quite get the draws that you maybe want.
You're right.
But I can see her doing quite well in this. A lot will come down to, I think that match against Salma Hani be quite big because that could open her draw up a little bit and give her a chance to make a run to like maybe quarters or not quite. Remind myself.
There are a couple, seems like, that rounds early on that could open up the draw, as you said. But now, lastly, I wanted to talk about 2 players who I think, as of this moment, are right below the top 3, Amanda Sobey and Joel King. What do you think both players needed? Like, what do you think is the difference between them and the top 3? As you said earlier, do you think it's the consistency?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit different. I think for Amanda, it's the consistency. I think Amanda has proven that she can beat those girls when she plays her best. I actually think Joelle is quite consistent. I just don't think she's quite got the tools in her game to beat them. She's not quite as deadly. She maybe doesn't move. She moves well, but not sure she moves as well as Hanya or Gohar, and I don't think her shot making is as clinical as Shabini's. So she's just lacking like 2-3% of what the other girls can offer. But like I say, I think Amanda has those tools. I think when she plays well and she takes the game, and she's obviously fitter now. I think for her, it's more the consistency of being able to just play at that level all the time, which is tough to do.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's what I had for the women's draw. Are there any other names that you think we should mention before we move on?
Yeah, a couple that I always like these big tournaments in Egypt where you get a chance to see some of the younger Egyptian players in the first round. So there's a couple of names that I picked out. So there's a girl called Noor Abul Makarim. Jana Sheha has done fairly well recently. She did well at black ball 2 or 3 months ago. And then there's a young girl that's also in the draw called Kenzie Ayman, who I mentioned earlier. I was over in Egypt a couple of months ago for the Egyptian Junior Nationals, and she won the under-19s.
Oh, wow.
So she's a good player. She's got quite a strange-looking forehand, very straight-armed, hits the ball with a lot of pace. And moves well, fast, plays at a fast pace. But she's actually playing in the final of the Bermuda Open, and the winner of that tournament gets a spot in the draw here. But even if she loses, she's already got a spot guaranteed.
Right.
Which means that the outcome of tonight's match, she plays Georgia Adderley from Scotland in the final. But I think regardless, because Kenzie's already in the draw, Georgia will then get the last spot in the main draw.
And I guess she'll be playing Tina Gillis from what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of non-Egyptians that are doing quite well. So a young English girl called Katie Malaf, who's done pretty well recently. She just won the European Junior Championships, and she's done fairly well in a couple of PSA events recently. And then there's a Japanese girl who I don't know a lot about.
Yeah, I put her name down as well, actually.
Satomi Watanabe. I remember her in juniors. She was a very good junior. She used to be a rival of Siva.
And then she kind of, obviously with COVID situation, she was kind of off the radar. And I know she recently played a tournament where she just plowed through the draw. Yeah,
that's one of the good things about these big, especially the Worlds. The Worlds is a bit different from the regular Platinum events because it's a 64 draw, not a 48 draw.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a few lower ranked players getting in, and quite often they get a chance to play on quite a big stage, sometimes against one of the top 10 players in the world, and you get sort of early glimpse of what they're capable of. And then the final girl I would highlight would be Chan Sin Yuk, who is
recently
from Hong Kong.
Yeah,
she just won the TOC Challenger event last week, and then got into the main draw of the TOC, won her first round in that, and she plays Sarah Jane Perry in the first round.
So that's a tough first round for her.
Yeah.
But by the way, what do you think of Sarah Jane Perry?
I think she's kind of in the tier with Amanda and Joelle, but maybe not quite as consistent. But again, I mean, she's won big events in the past. She won the Black Ball Open a few years ago. She's definitely a threat when her game is on.
Right. I mean, her racket work is top class.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Obviously works with, possibly based on who he's working with, one of the best coaches in the world at the moment, Rob Owen, who has done a phenomenal job with Paul Call, developing his game. And you can see the way Sarah Jane hits the ball that she's very skillful, actually moves pretty well for her size, maybe not as mobile and as athletic as some of the smaller players, but yeah, very, very good player.
Yeah, I think that does it for the women's draw.
Yeah, they were the main names that I highlighted. Actually, one more, and this girl was actually a bit unfortunate because she plays Tayyab in the first round, but Aifa Azman is another up-and-coming Malaysian girl who's doing pretty well recently. is actually seeded. She's up in the top 32, but unfortunately she's drawn Taya.
That's a tough draw for her.
Which, yeah.
Also, I'd be remiss not to mention Siva. If we could quickly talk about her, because she's the winner of the CSA individuals. She's also, her performances throughout the PSA has been rock solid. Do you think she has a real shot at making it deep to round 2-3?
I'm just looking quickly at her draw.
She's up against Nadine Shaheen in the second round.
That's actually a very good draw for her. I don't want to go over this, but she was my most overrated female squash player in the last podcast we did. So if there's anyone in the top 16 you want, then in my opinion, at least, that's who you want. And then she would actually play the winner of so assuming she was to beat Nadine, which personally I think she would.
I'm gonna go with you as well on that one. I think she will.
She would then play the winner of that little section between Salma Hani, El Tayeb.
I think she'll have a competitive match with either of them as well.
Yeah.
From how good she is.
So
she has she could cause some problems in this draw, I think.
It's actually a tough section of the draw, but at the same time, there's no sort of standout. Maybe Tayeb is the standout player to beat in that section, but I think all of them will be thinking there's an opportunity there to make it through to the quarterfinals.
Right. Oh, yeah, that is a really good section. That one in the bottom, towards the bottom. Yeah. But, okay, I think that's set for the women's draw, and Stuart's pick is Noelle Shabini. Yeah. I'm gonna go with Go Hard just to switch it up and go against what your pick is. I think she's gonna take it. I just think because she's not up against, she's gonna have an easier draw just because she's not playing Hania or El Sherbini in the semifinals.
Yeah, that could be a factor. I know in tennis, when sort of Nadal, Federer and Djokovic were at the peak of their rivalry, the draw was always huge because one of those players would have to play another one in the semis, and then one of them would play someone else.
Right.
And they always said that quite often would determine the sort of how the tournament played out. And that could be the way it works here, where those two maybe play in the semis and have a bit of a battle, and Gohar gets through a little bit fresher.
Yeah.
I would say if it's Hania, I think Hania is physically and mentally prepared for anything at the moment. She seems really motivated and desperate to sort of.
Yeah, she does have that fire in her, and also her confidence must be off the charts right now after coming off the British Open win.
Exactly,
as you said before. But moving on to the men's draw, also a very interesting situation right now. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention that for those of you who don't know, Asal had pulled out of the TFC because he caught COVID, and I just wanted to let people know that could be a factor of where he stands with his recovery from it.
Yeah, I don't personally think it will be a huge factor. Unless he suffered some serious effects, I don't think COVID is really knocking people down and making them miss like weeks and weeks of training these days. Right. So,
the fact that he's already in the draw and must be.
Yeah.
But okay, who do you think is going to win this outright?
On recent form, I think it's hard to look past Paul Cole. He's been the player in form. He's obviously number one in the world, number one seed. He's just won the British Open without dropping a game, which is, that itself is very impressive. I do think Farag's looked very good at TOC this week. But I do think there's not a question mark as such, but I think for Farag to beat Paul, I think he has to change a few things in his game. I think from their match at the British Open, it seemed like tactically Paul had figured out what he needed to do. There was a great little analysis of the match, and shout out to Crosscourt Analytics blog who do some really interesting dives into matches and give some sort of, they do blog posts and sometimes little social media posts, but they basically highlighted how much Paul was playing down the forehand side against Ali.
Yeah, I think I did see this post, yeah.
And how he was, Paul's admits himself that he spent a lot of time changing his forehand technique and he feels much more comfortable on that side, and just tried to switch the play over to that side and keep the ball on that side as much as he could when he had the opportunity. They've also done stuff in the past about how much Paul's lifting the ball and how much he's using height and lobbing more than other players, and also how much more willing he is to hit the ball deep consecutively.
Yep. The last couple times they've played, Paul's won pretty decisively, and it seems like Farag's out of answers every time he plays him.
Yeah, it seems more like a tactical challenge at this point. I think essentially Paul's went away and figured out what he needed to do to beat Ali, and he's obviously, based on the success, he's managed to come up with the right solution, or certainly a solution that is proving to be effective for him. And now I think the tables are reversed, and it's now up to Ali to go away and figure out what he needs to do. I don't think it's a case of, I'm sure if he just plays really, really well, it might be enough. But I really feel like it's a tactical challenge rather than a physical or mental or just playing well in the challenge.
Yeah, I think, that British Open run was to not drop any games against the draw he had was out of this world. I just don't understand how he didn't drop a single game to Greg Marsh, Diego Elias, Mustafa Sal, and then Farag. That was quite a dominant performance, and seems like the only one who's figured him out is actually Victor Cruin.
Yeah.
The Canary
only defeat in the last couple of months.
Yeah. But also a talking point is Farag has a very tough draw in this tournament. He's got Yusuf Ibrahim coming up against him third round, and then he's got Marwan El Sharbaghi in the quarterfinals, which he historically has never figured out how to beat him. And then he's got either Asal or Diego. And so I do think he's got a way tougher route to the final than Paul Cole does.
He does, although Paul also, I would say Paul and Ali actually have two of the toughest third round matches that they could have got.
Mazen Hisham.
Paul has Mazen Hisham, who appears to be playing really well at the moment, although he did lose fairly convincingly last night to Farag at TFC. The only other sort of player outside the top 8 seeds that probably would have been tougher than those two would be Joe Macon. But both of them have got fairly tough third round matches. But I think you're right. I think beyond that, then Ali's quarter and semi-finals are potentially a little bit tougher.
Yeah. Where do you see now, speaking of Joel Macon, he's paired up to play Momin in the third round. And I don't see any upsets happening till before then for either of those players. Who do you think will win out of that matchup?
Good question. I think that is a match that could come down to just who plays well on the day. It's a hard one to predict, but if I had to, the first couple of rounds I think will be telling. I know Joe has made it quite clear that his goal is to push on and start certainly making semis and hopefully finals and winning some of these bigger events. But that's really tough to do when you're ranked 9 in the world and you
keep getting paired up in this.
There's no one in the top 8. I would say almost both Shabagis are the two weakest players in the top 8 at the moment on current form, which is crazy to say.
Which is true. I agree with you.
There's no easy draws there, and Joel has to basically play, if he wants to win a tournament, he has to win 4 matches against those top 8 players, whereas the guys in the top 8 only actually have to win 3 matches against each other. So he has an extra challenge, which is why it's so tough for him to move up into that next bracket, because again, if he loses to Tarek, then he ends up getting the ranking points that everyone behind him is getting for making the last 16. And
right.
Assuming the top 8 players all make it to the quarters, which I know that's a big if, but they then all get more ranking points than him. So sort of a vicious cycle that keeps repeating itself until he can crack that top 8.
Yeah. And another interesting player that I do think we need to talk about is Ferris Suzuki. One of those in-form players. If he is in form, he's quite unbeatable, I think.
Yeah. Just won the Canary Wharf event.
Yeah, and that was unfortunate with the draw right after.
Yeah. But beat Asal in the final of Canary Wharf 3-love, and then lost to him in 5 in his first match of the British Open.
Yeah, he went a little haywire in that one. So.
Yeah, as he's prone to do.
I thought he figured it out, but clearly not. Yeah,
he's definitely a threat to anyone when he's playing well and when he's confident. He's done fairly well in Egypt in the past. Won the Black Ball tournament, which was kind of his first big win. I think he then made the final of Black Ball the next time it was held. So yeah, he's got a good record at home, and if he's playing well, then he'll be tough to beat.
Yeah. Now I think he's paired to meet. He's got a pretty tough. He got Greg Marsh coming in round 3, and then obviously after that would be Mohamed El Shorbagy. And I really do want to talk to you about Mohamed El Shorbagy. A little bit controversial right now with what's happening with him. Do you want to ask a question? Do you think he's done for in terms of winning titles?
It's hard to write him off just because he's been at the top of the game for almost 10 years. I think there was a crazy stat recently that he'd been ranked in the top 3 in the world for about 8 years recently.
Yeah, I'm a little shocked he's still in that top 3 right now.
Yeah, he doesn't feel like the 3rd best player in the world at the moment. He does,
yeah.
Based on his... But again, yeah, the thing I find interesting is it doesn't seem clear what the issue is. Is it physical? Is it just a little bit loss of motivation and determination, more mental? He's always been such a fighter, and even when he lost, it was such a hard match, and he would never go down easily. And he seems like he's lost a few matches in the last probably over a year now.
It's been a year, I think, since this drop off of form.
The first match I remember seeing it in was when he played Asal in the final of the World Tour Finals in Cairo about a year ago.
Where he won initially in the rounds earlier, and then the final he just seemed gassed out. In
the final, they had a really long first game, if I remember rightly, like 35 minutes. And normally you would think that was perfect for Shorbagy. Even if he had lost that game, he won the game, but you thought, well, 35 minutes, he's 1-love up. It's going to be tough. And he just kind of dropped off completely from that point on, lost 3-1. And then he had a similar, I remember seeing him play at the US Open at the Spectre Center against Diego. And he had a similar drop off there, just wasn't able to compete physically, which is historic. Like I say, that's been sort of the foundation of his game over the years. He's obviously a great squash player, but he's just renowned as being so mentally tough and doesn't give you much cheap, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Yeah, and then his recent with Yusuf Ibrahim, again, in that 5th game, it seemed like there was a huge drop-off with him physically as well.
Yeah, I've never seen him acknowledge that there's an issue, like an injury, or like I say, maybe he's just lost a bit of drive and motivation to push himself in training as much as he used to. I'm not quite sure, but I'm not quite ready to write him off yet. I think with guys at that level that have proven that they can play that well for so long, you have to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. But the longer it goes on, the more you start to question whether he can get back to that level. He's still talking about trying to get back to like number 1 in the world. I don't quite see that. I just think for him to start beating Paul and Ali consistently, with Asal also on the rise and probably the third best player in the world at the moment. It's going to be tough for Shibagi to match that intensity, and they're physically either in the prime or only getting better in Asal's case. So it's going to be tough for Shibagi for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting. It's funny because I don't want to write him off as he's going to be losing early on. I'm saying with such high expectations with him, considering he's proven to be so dominant over the past 8-9 years, and this drop off. I mean, he's still at world number 3, and I do think it's interesting because he's historically had a very good record against Paul Cole, and I think that could be in play. But the question I had for you is, do you think Muhammad can make it to the semis with the draw he has right now?
I think he'll get through the first 2 rounds. One of the strange things about his current game is that he's actually getting through the earlier rounds probably easier than he did when he was at his peak. I sort of remember when he was at his absolute best, he was almost more vulnerable in the first couple of rounds, and then once he got into his stride and got into a rhythm, he was actually better in the latter rounds. Whereas he's almost flipped that, and now he's beating guys very easily. And I don't know if that's because he's not that confident in his physicality, so he's much more focused and switched on in the early rounds and making sure that he doesn't waste energy and have a really tough match when he doesn't feel like he can get through that single match and then also back up the next day. But I don't see him losing to. I mean, he plays a young Hungarian kid, Galas Farkas, in the first round.
Not a bad squash player.
But
had some good results. Yeah,
certainly not at Shibagi's level. And then he would play Shahjahan Khan, or at the moment it's a qualifier. It's going to be the winner of the Bermuda tournament, who I'll talk about in a second. But I think that will probably, if I had to predict, Rory Stewart from Scotland.
Yeah,
player I know very well. Used to coach him. I've seen him since he was about 9 years old. Actually, Rory tells a funny story about how I made him cry when he was 7 years old.
What did you do?
I don't actually remember this, but he came to a squad that I was running in Scotland, and it was a U13 squad. So all the kids were like, it was kind of regional, national level, so they were decent players, but I didn't realise that Rory was only 7. He'd been invited to this U13 squad when he was 7 years old.
Wow.
And he asked me if I could help warm the ball up, and I apparently said, if you're at this squad, you should be good enough to warm the ball up yourself. And he apparently cried. He told me this story years later. But anyway, Rory's playing the final of the Bermuda Open. I was over there with Andrew Douglas this week, and Andrew unfortunately came up against Rory in the second round, which was probably the toughest draw he could have got, because even before the tournament started, I knew Rory was playing well. He beat George Parker 3-love at the European last week. And I'm pretty sure he'll win the final today, which would then give him that final spot in the draw that we were talking about against Shahjahan Khan.
Yeah. Do you think Rory is someone that we should be looking out for in the future? Do you think this is a huge breakout for him?
I actually think that the way he's playing, he's more than capable of winning that match against Shahjahan Khan, which would potentially put him up against Shibagi in the second round.
Oh, wow.
But then the interesting one after that is Shibagi would come up against, well, according to Seedens, Gawad, but Gawad would have to get past either Victor Kroon or Baptiste Masoi, and he just lost to Victor this week at TOC.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that Victor will beat Baptiste, so
that's going to be a phenomenal first round.
Yeah.
Those two French players, yeah.
There's quite a few, and the French have been really unlucky. I think there's like 6. I think there's 6 French players. Maybe 7. Yeah. So you've got Lucas Serme is playing Castagnier first round. Then you've got Auguste Dessord, who just beat Baptiste, playing Greg Marsh first round.
Yeah, this is a little questionable with how this draw was made, with putting all the French players together.
I think the only Frenchman that isn't playing another Frenchman is maybe Castagnier.
No, Castanier's playing Lucas Serme.
Oh, so no, There's
they're all
six Frenchmen in the draw, and they're all playing each other.
Sebastian Bumile.
Bumile?
Yeah, he's playing the Spanish player, Bernat.
Okay.
But yeah, other than that, very questionable on who made this draw. But
I think PSA would probably say that it's done by a computer algorithm. I had a running joke with a few friends about when Camille Sam was playing Hanya in every single tournament for about a year and a half. That the system was obviously broken. There was a glitch in the matrix, as they say.
Yeah, I remember they were playing every tournament together and going to 5.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back to Mohamed El Shorbagy and his draw situation, yeah, he's got a tough one.
He does. I can see him making the quarters. The quarters he would play Dasuki, and that'll be a big test of how well he's playing, because I think if Dasuki's playing well, you need to be able to match that physicality a little bit. And as we said recently, Shorbagy hasn't shown that he can. Now, whether his experience and his ability to get inside Dasuki's head might sort of sway it in his favour.
Could very much so see Mohamed doing that.
Exactly. Maybe that's the way his game has to go at the moment until he can rediscover his best form. It's just, if that's the way he's going to play, then there's no one you'd rather come up against than Dasuki, because at least you know you're shot there.
That is very true. Yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely an outsider. I think if he made the semis and came up against Paul, he'd be very happy with his tournament. But then, as you say, he has that great record. But then there's a few people that had great records against Paul, but it hasn't really meant that much recently, because I think Paul's game is just on a different level to what it was even a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he would feel very confident playing Shorbagy or Farag or any of those guys. Anyone
that's in his... I actually do think, as you said earlier, about the Heshem matchup for him in round 3 is going to be a ripper of a match. It's such a contrast of style.
It is, but I think it plays into Paul's favour, because I think what you have to do, and Ali Farag talked about this after his match, about how you have to close the court down and keep it straight and tight. And there's no one at the moment that's doing that better than Paul. I think Mazen is thriving off these. I mean, he's definitely playing more patiently, and he looks like he's better. He's said that he's been able to train more consistently because he's not had the injury problems, which is helping him. But there's still question marks about how patient he can be when someone is just hitting the ball tight to the side wall over and over and over again. And I think if there's anyone that can do that for an hour or longer if he needs to, then it's Paul.
Yeah. Before we go into the bottom half, I wanted to stick with one player, that Victor Crouin. I know last time we spoke about, it's just interesting, last time we spoke about him, he was really just, it was the CSA. Now he's since then has played a shitload of PSA tournaments, and he's been doing very well. Is there something that you saw that might have changed throughout these past couple months for him? Because I know Yusuf's name has been mentioned so many times, but his name hasn't been as much, even though he's been having such great results.
Yeah, well, he obviously he had a great match with Yusuf in the final of the college individual championships, which has to be, I mean, I don't see how it could not be, but it has to be the best match that's ever been played by two college sports players.
Yeah.
It was just a phenomenal match. Both of them playing very well. I had some question marks about how much Yusuf would be up for the college individuals after his run to the Windy City, but I can tell you he did not toss that match up. He wanted to win that title, and it's actually going to be wild that he's going to graduate and having never won the college individual championships. Yeah. But yeah, it was just such a good quality match, both playing certainly top 20, arguably even close to top 10 level. And then the following week, like we talked about earlier, Victor went and played Paul Call in Canary Wharf and beat him. And yeah, he seems very assured with what he's doing. He's moving the ball around well. He's added a little bit more attacking weapons to his game. I think his counter drop in the front is very good. He's got a very, very good working boast, especially on the backhand side.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because last time we were talking about his game, as good as it was, you were talking about a little bit of lack of variation and stuff. Do you think he has added that since then, with his experience at the PSA now racking up as we speak? And do you think he has the potential to break into that top 10?
He's definitely got potential to break into the top 10. Do you think he's almost top, I think he's been top 20. I think he's dropped out briefly, but I'm sure he'll get back in the top 20 pretty soon. Mm-hmm. I didn't see his match this week against Gawad, but that's another big win for him.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say he's added more variety, but what he has added is more attacking weapons, if you like. He's able to hit winning shots even against the best players and the best movers in the world, which is not an easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think I mentioned this the last time we spoke about his game, that he's just so tough to break him out of his rhythm. I still feel like that is the one weakness, if you can break him out of that rhythm and stop him and start him. But when he's playing, Yusuf's game is made for breaking out of rhythm, and even he couldn't do it, so it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting situation with him and his draw. But moving down to the bottom half, I want to talk about two players with you in the bottom half, Asal and Diego Elias. Both relatively, Asal's very young, but Diego's also relatively young. What do you think about that matchup? Because I don't think upset's going to be happening to either of them. No,
it doesn't. Neither of them are really losing to low-ranked players these days. Mm-hmm. Asal especially is just becoming very, very consistent.
Yeah.
He's really only losing. I think he maybe lost to Tarek somewhere, but
no, he is.
He's only really losing to Paul and Ali. I'm actually looking at it. I've got it here. He lost to Suki, like we mentioned, and he lost a couple of times to Tarek. Once to Tarek in Canary Wharf, the end of last year. But apart from that, he's lost twice to Tarek, twice to Paul, and twice to Ali in the last year.
Yeah, he's kind of giving off the Gregory Gaultier vibes of just there's no upsets are just not going to be a thing with him.
Yeah,
in the early rounds.
And then Diego, he's a little bit more vulnerable, but again, he's starting to show much more consistency in his performances and results recently.
Yeah.
He's another guy who's talked openly about wanting to make a push up the rankings. He says he feels physically much more confident in his game.
He seems to really emphasize every time he comes on that he's ready physically.
Yeah. Which is great, because I think that most people agreed that was the thing that was missing. Mm-hmm. We'll see how he gets on tonight against Ali. I think that'll be a good test. If he wins that, it'll give him a lot of confidence going into next week.
Mm-hmm. He's got a tough first round with one of the names I had written down for in-form upcoming players, Patrick Rooney.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see.
I think they played quite recently, if I'm right.
They might have played in the Manchester Open back last year.
But I don't see him losing to Patrick. You're right, Patrick is playing well. He is up and coming, but I don't think he's top 5 level, which is what Diego's at the moment.
Yeah.
I guess with Diego, it's a case of whether he can put 3 high-level matches together. I don't think it's a physical thing with him anymore. I think maybe there's a little bit of that when he plays Paul and Ali, but he beat Paul fairly recently.
Yeah, in the Motor City.
Yeah,
right.
So he can do it, but I guess he's going to have to, in order to win the tournament, he's going to have to beat 3 of the top 4 players in the world, unless there's some seeding upsets, obviously.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier about it's like the 3 matches are going to be tough in the later rounds in the men's side. I want to talk about, I mean, we talked about Mohammed now, but I want to talk about Marwan. And I think he does have a very interesting draw. I do think he's very vulnerable to upsets, as we've seen as of late, but he's also been a player who can never kind of write off with his situation.
Yeah, I find Marwan the most interesting to know, like, where he's at coming into a tournament. He's probably the only player that could lose early or could just go on a run.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a really tricky first round match against Iker Pajares, who is a pretty tough physical player. I mean, if Marwan's playing well, you can't see him having too many troubles, but he hasn't been playing his best recently, so there's no guarantee. I would expect him to then get through to last 16, which could potentially be up against Miguel Rodriguez.
I'm sure, yeah, with Miguel, also an interesting situation. You never know what you're going to get out of him each tournament, but looking at his draw, he probably wants to be in the mindset of wanting to play.
Yeah. And then, like you said, Marwan could then potentially come up against Ali Farag in the quarters, which you almost can see him just turning it on. Just I don't know how well those two get on. When you see them play, they never look like they're particularly friendly, but that could just be Marwan like trying to get into Ali's head.
Do you think it's a playing style thing? Because it is pretty known at this point that Farag struggles with Marwan.
I think it's more to do with the fact that Marwan intentionally, I think, makes the game a little bit scrappy and
Farag doesn't like that. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the more that Marwan knows that is effective and is getting into Ali's head, the more he's inclined to do it.
Yeah,
rightly so. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I have a big problem with Asal and his sort of blocking and some of his antics, and could go as far as saying cheating. But
yeah,
my biggest problem with it is the fact that he pretends that he's not doing anything wrong. I actually have way more time and respect for Marwan, who's just up front. It's like, yeah, I'm blocking. So
and I don't care.
Like, I'm trying to win a squash match. What's the problem? He's not trying to be everyone's friend. He's not trying to pretend that he's playing fairly. Like, I have way more respect for that than the guy that cheats and then says, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I won't do it again," and then next rally does the exact same thing again. Yeah,
Marwan's does not shy away from trying to look like a good guy, as seen in the past.
Yeah, and I love it. I love watching him play. I love the way he just doesn't really care what people think of him. He's just out there competing, and sometimes he competes hard, and sometimes he's just like, you know what, not today. Like, the referee's a bit of a dick, so I'm not going to
start screaming at him.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, that would be it's tough to see Farag beating Marwan at this point. When I see them matched up together, I have a tendency to lean towards Marwan at this point to come through.
Yeah, Marwan hasn't really been playing great. Results recently have been, by his standards, fairly mediocre.
Yeah. I had a friend on last time we were doing this for the Windy City Open, and it was funny because I think he said it very well. He said Marwan's up for one good tournament per year where he can just make that run, and I'm afraid that he might have used that up in the Windy City Open, but hopefully he does bring the fire for this.
I'm actually looking at his results recently. He's lost to Patrick Rooney, Mazen Hesham. He's lost twice to Nicky Muller, who Nicky Muller's been playing very well, but you still have to say that's a bad result for Marwan.
Yeah, for his standards,
He's lost to Yusuf Ibrahim, Faris Dasuki, Mazen Hesham again. Lost, even going back to sort of October last year in Qatar, he lost to Kandra, lost to Will Strott. So, yes, certainly not the best squash of his career.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we did cover the top seeds, but are there any names that you think we need to be watching out for other than the top guys?
I mean, the ones that I'd made a note of were people that we've already spoke about. So Patrick Rooney.
Yes.
Again, I don't see him causing an upset against Diego, but I do think in the near future he's going to be moving up the rankings. Even although he's not quite in the draw yet, Rory Stewart is another player that I think will be a top 30 player in my mind within maybe 12 months, maybe a little bit longer. But the way he's playing at the moment, I was very impressed with his squash when I saw him play this week.
I mean, to also beat George Parker in 3 is a very, very good result.
He lost in 5 to George at the Irish Open.
Yeah.
And then a week later, he played him again at the European Championships and beat him. But just overall, the way Rory's playing, I mean, he might disagree with this, but he was never the most committed player in the world. He certainly sort of towards the end of the time that I worked with him, he had just moved away from home and was in Edinburgh, where he was sort of studying a little bit and training, but he was certainly enjoying student life more than you would expect for a professional athlete. But he seems much more committed these days, and I think it's he's fitter, he's moving really well, and his racket skills have always been up at a high level, so that was never in doubt. But even there, even better now, his variety of shot and his control of the ball is very, very good.
Yeah, well, hopefully he tunes into this, because a lot has been said about Rory in this podcast.
Including when I made him cry.
But I actually do want to talk about one name that I wrote down, was James Willstrop. I think he has actually a really good draw on him. He's the type of guy right now, you can't write him off, but also with his age, you don't know what you can get out of him. But I do think he's historically done well against Marsh, and that could see him progress further into the draw.
I think at this point of James's career, I think it's just enjoyable to see him still playing and enjoying playing well. I think he acknowledges that he's obviously not at the same level he used to be, but I think he's enjoying competing. He's enjoying. I mean, he said that he still enjoys playing on the big stage and glass courts, and I've heard rumours that this will be his last season. I think he's targeting the Commonwealth Games this summer.
Oh wow!
As sort of a point to maybe end his career, but he's just he was one of my favourite players to watch. He's actually a bit younger than me, which is a little bit strange that you looked up to someone that was 2 or 3 years younger than you.
Yeah.
But I actually played James when he was 16 years old, and did not go well for me, unfortunately, even though I was 2 or 3 years older than him. But yeah, it's just good to still see someone like that.
Yeah.
And it also, I think another interesting thing, it shows you that the previous generations were as good. Obviously, James is not beating Paul and Ali and those guys, but the fact that he can still compete with them shows that when he was at his best, the
just
level
how good.
was just, yeah, exactly.
That past generation was, I
agree. You saw that a little bit a few years ago when Greg was like 34 years old and got to number 1 in the world.
Yeah.
So yeah, that past generation of, well, Nick Matthew, James Willstrop, Gaultier, and then guys like Shabana and Rami and Shabagi's kind of bridged the two. Mm-hmm. That was a very, very strong era in squash.
Do you think, wait, real quick side note, do you think that era of squash is a lot higher in terms of level of squash than right now with Paul Cole and Farag leading the charge?
I think there was a bit more depth back then.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the guys that are like 6, 7, 8, 9 would have been as good. I still remember there was a period in sort of mid 2000s where you had guys like Shabana, Jonathan Power was still at the end of his career, Peter Nicol. Then you had newer guys coming up like Nick and James. You had Gaultier, you had Terry Linku, you had Lee Beachill, John White.
Yeah.
It was like 12 guys could win any big tournament. And now I would say there's maybe 5 or 6. And not, I mean, get someone like Joe Macon at 9 is a very, very good player, but I don't think he's not shown that he can win one of these big tournaments.
I don't think a lot of people are going to ever pick him as to win a tournament at this magnitude.
Back then, there was legitimately, David Palmer's another one I've forgotten, Kareem Darwish. Every single tournament, you had 12 guys that could win the tournament.
Wow.
And I don't think we're at that point at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that those guys were better at the very top. I'm sure Paul and Ali would have been competitive they would have been right in that mix with those guys. But I don't think the depth is quite what it was.
Yeah.
I still think Rami's the best player I've ever seen when he was playing well. I don't think Paul or Ali would be that close to Rami in his prime.
Yeah, he was a once in a lifetime type of player. Thank God he chose squash as a sport, because he got to witness some greatness.
Yeah.
But to wrap it up for the final picks, Stu, you're going for Paul Cole to win it all for the men's draw.
After what I saw at the British Open,
yeah,
I just think he's got so much confidence at the moment. Am I right in saying he's not won a big tournament in Egypt?
No, he's won the black ball in December.
Oh yeah,
yeah. That was his breakthrough, I think.
I think that he believes that he's the best player in the world, and I love this quote about how hard he'd worked to get to number one, and he wasn't going to be giving it up easily. A lot of people talk about the pressure of being number one, whereas he seems to be absolutely loving that position.
Oh yeah.
So I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I agree. And he's won all the platinum events of 2022 so far. I mean, just to show how consistent he's been.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild.
He's almost had a perfect record if it wasn't for that one defeat to Victor.
Yeah, who would have thought that he would break the... But yeah, I can't disagree with you on this pick. I'm going to go with Paul Cole as well. But hopefully Stuart becomes 4 for 4 after this episode next week. And I guess PSA really needs to start listening in on this, because Stuart doesn't get it wrong. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you, Stu, for doing this very last minute with me.
Thanks for having me, Sean. It's been fun again.